Whoa, that shower was epic. Well, time to go slurp up my prune juice. Oh no! Oh, if only I wasn't an antiquated experience on outdated hardware. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't have happened.
The first-person shooter is a genre that has dominated the gaming industry for literal decades. They started popping up all over the place in the 6th console generations with games like Halo, Counter-Strike, and Call of Duty. They replaced 3D platformers as the dominant video game genre, and while I think they really peaked in popularity on the 360 and PS3, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. I grew up during the 7th console generation, which is the Wii, the 360, and the PS3, and while all the cool kids had the PS3 and the Xbox, I was a Nintendo kid.
Oh, hi! You caught me practicing a little something I like to call self-inflicted celibacy.
If you had a Wii, you were treated as a second-class citizen, and you'd be promptly executed in the town square. I'm kidding about the execution part, but being a Nintendo fan back then was social suicide. In the event of someone asking me what my video game preferences were, I would just lie and hope my improvisational skills would carry me through the conversation.
What's your thoughts on the new Call of Duty game?
Those were rough times, but over the years, I've branched out and played a few games that don't even feature Mario, and while doing so, I've made a huge discovery.
The grandfather of FPS games was on a Nintendo console. Yeah, freak you, Matt from middle school. Turns out that Nintendo games aren't for baby losers like you said.
Based on the 19th film in the James Bond franchise, Goldeneye 007 started development in 1995. It was made by Rareware, which at the time was legendary for making games on Nintendo platforms until they suffered a fate worse than death and were bought out by Microsoft. The game would have a very rough development under a small and inexperienced dev team. Hell, Nintendo actually canceled the game, but Rare just didn't tell their developers that the game was canceled, so they kept working on it anyway. Their struggles turned out to be worth it, and after 2 years, the game came out and promptly sold 8 million copies and shattered records all over the place, becoming one of the most influential FPS games of all time.
On a side note, make sure that you buy the correct 007 game for the N64. There were actually two, and if you need to know the difference between the two of them, one of them has a tumor.
It's been almost 25 years since, and while people who grew up with the game continue to praise it to high hell, the common consensus is that it's aged poorly. I decided to give this game a chance and get to the bottom of this. Does GoldenEye hold up, or is it destined to be a relic of the past? So this game has two modes. There's the critically acclaimed split-screen multiplayer and the story campaign that nobody ever talks about. So I'm going to be using the single-player campaign as a basis for my critique, because I'm like super contrarian and edgy. Anyways, the single-player campaign will have you going through a series of different level maps, or missions as the game calls them. These missions are based on set pieces from the movie, and from what I can tell, the story mode overall is pretty faithful to the movie adaptation, but I can't really verify this since I've never seen GoldenEye. In these missions, you have to clear certain objectives while trading gunfire with CPUs. Once you clear every objective, find the level exit and you beat the level. But before we talk about all of that, we have to take a look at how the game looks. You've probably noticed by now that this game has aged horrifically in the looks department.
Like your mom.
The character models look like garbage, there's no getting around it. Most 5th generation games don't hold up too well graphically, but the games that went for a realistic art style fared the worst, and GoldenEye is trying to mimic the live action film, so yeah. The environments actually look okay. Yeah, they're low poly and don't have much detail, but impressive textures have never been requirements for the FPS genre. I mean, look at Counter-Strike. That came out 3 years after Goldeneye, and it's still played by millions to this day. The character models look disgusting, though. Kinda like your mom.
My mom's dead, man.
The models are so jaggy, and the textures look like they're just pasted on. Oh, and don't even get me started on the draw distance. If you want immersion, you're going to have to accept that James Bond forgot to put on his eye contacts before every mission, because the draw distance of this game causes violent popping. This wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if the game was designed around this, but it's not. The CPU can spot you long before they're visible on screen, and they will shoot you. It's incredibly frustrating, and you will lose health constantly without being at fault, because you can't even see where you're being shot from. Fixing this wouldn't even be that hard. All you'd have to do is program the CPU to not detect you, unless you're in close enough proximity to see them first. Don't play this game if you like having good eyesight. Like I said before, you have to complete a series of objectives before finding the exit to each level. I like this a lot because it makes sense. You're not just going in and shooting all the guys. You're a spy. Of course you'd have espionage to do. The amount of objectives per level is tied to the difficulty you select. Each difficulty adds about 2 extra tasks to your checklist, and if you exit the level before you complete each task, the game forces you to restart the level as if you died. I'd prefer it if you were simply blocked from leaving before completing the checklist, but that's more of a nitpick that I can forgive, since this game came out over 2 decades ago and it was the first of its kind. What I can't forgive are some of these objectives themselves, though. They're just too vague for their own good. You only get 1 line of text for each objective, and the objectives themselves can be very specific. For example, in the second level, one of your objectives is to place C4 onto some chemical stylos. The problem is you only have enough C4 to test on 1 room, and there are like 4 rooms that have these big containers that you could mistake as being the ones you have to blow up. And the ones you have to blow up are in the furthest room from point A and point B at the end of the level. So there are 3 rooms between you and the stylos you have to blow up. And you only have enough C4 to test on 1 room. So unless you already know what you're supposed to do, or you're very lucky, you have to restart at least twice. Not 3 times, because one of the rooms with these containers is kind of a separate room that you kind of have to go on a branching path to get to. It's what I'm saying is it's optional. The 1 line of text that told you what to do didn't describe what the containers look like or how far into the level they are. Here's another problematic objective. So you're in this boat level, right? And on a side note, I really like the design of this level. It's really cool. But that's for a later section. Anyways, so you're on this boat level, and you have to save some hostages. The game doesn't tell you how many there are, or where they are, because there isn't a level map for some reason, even though there is a mini-map in multiplayer. But anyways, if you walk into a room with a hostage, and the bad guy sees you before you see them, they will execute the guy, and they will execute these hostages before you're able to process what's going on. I've had to restart this level like 20 times until I was able to memorize every hostage location, and I still managed to let 1 die, but the game let me beat the level anyway, so now I'm just confused. Could I have let all the hostages die in 1, or is there a limit to how many you can let die? The game doesn't tell you any of this. I've had to restart levels from failing to complete a vague objective more often than I had to restart a level from dying. You are lucky to find a mission without a single easy to misinterpret objective. That is basically just artificial padding. If you are confused by an objective in this game, there is no shame in looking at a guide. Okay, so this is easily the one aspect of the game that I take no issue with at all. The soundtrack is reminiscent of those spy movies with the James Bond guy in them. And I just realized that this game is based off a movie with the James Bond guy. So, you know, it checks out. Anyways, these thematic spy thriller soundtracks really set the theme of the game, and they make me want to do awesome spy shit. So that's pretty cool too. I also don't think that the outdated N64 compression is a negative aspect, because it gives the soundtrack of this game a very unique sound, which helps it avoid sounding like another generic parody of a spy movie, because that's really overdone these days. You know, all that shit. Anyways, this game is jam-packed with bangers, man. Like, for real, check this part out. You're probably wondering why I chose this boring-ass song for the part where I'm talking about how good the music is, but I'm afraid you're mistaken, because this song has a sick drop. This is probably the part of the game that people say has aged the worst. Look at this dildo controller thingy. How the frick am I supposed to play an FPS game with this thing? Well, in this FPS game, you use the sole analog stick to move. You can use the C buttons to move without the camera changing, but only left and right, because up and down move the camera, not you. To aim with a reticle, you have to hold down the R button, which freezes you in place so that you can use the analog stick to move the crosspin around the screen. You switch weapons with A, reload and interact with doors and buttons with B, and fire with the Z button. This setup isn't very great, and I recommend using aim assist, because you're pretty hopeless without aim assist. But, you know, with all the factors taken into consideration, you know, it's not too bad. I mean, Turok probably did it better, but you're playing on a dildo. There's not much you can do. There's no extra analog stick to move the camera with, and this is, like I said, I cannot stress this enough. This game is the first of its kind. It's not the first FPS, but it's the first FPS on a console where you're not using a keyboard and it's not pixelated. So you have to give it some leeway. And you can get used to it after about 3 levels. I got used to it eventually. It's passable. The level design in this game is really good. Sometimes, levels that are in claustrophobic hallways are naturally my favorites because they mask the limitations this game has without making it too linear. I really like the frigate level and the bunker level. In this level you have to destroy the security cameras before they spot you, because if they do, they'll spawn infinite enemies and they're really hard to beat. Anyways, if this game only had closed-in levels like these, it would, well, this segment would be over, because I don't really talk about positives, as I've just realized. But obviously that's not the case. For example, let's look at my least favorite level, the Surface of Severnaya, or however that is to be pronounced. Anyways, the Surface of Severnaya is the exterior of a Russian base that you infiltrate in the next level. For now, you have to gain access to said base by going through this vent, but not before completing every objective, which has you ping-ponging around the map, and it is not fun to navigate this map. This isn't like Mario 64, where it's just fun to run around and yahoo, whippy, do the flip. This is Goldeneye, the controls are really stiff, and the draw distance is awful. So yeah, enemies will spot you and shoot at you before you have no idea where the fuck they are, because they won't show up on the screen. I ended up camping out in this hut and letting the enemies come to me so that they'd have to open the door and I'd have the advantage. But after about 10 minutes, I just realized that they're infinitely spawning these guys, and your best course of action is just to avoid them altogether. This could be fun and play into the stealthiness that comes with the spy genre, but you can't be stealthy if you can't see the CPU before they see you. Oh, and those security cameras from earlier make an appearance, but since this is an open-ended level with the infamously bad draw distance, they will see you before you see them, and you'll be punished even more with infinitely spawning damage sponges. It's so annoying. Oh, and vague objective syndrome strikes again with this one. There are multiple structures that you could mistake as the entrance to the bunker. At first, I thought it was this big air vent thingy, but when I tried to get in, it was locked, so I just assumed that it was something for a higher difficulty level. So I kept exploring and found this door that looks even more like the entrance to a military bunker, but you can't get in there either. When you try, you just trigger the same alarm that happens when you trigger the cameras, and that spawns the bullet sponges, and you get chased around until you die. What you're supposed to do is go back to that air vent and shoot off the locks that you won't notice unless you're looking down. There is only one other instance of shooting locks in this game before this level, and it was in the first level, which I played 2 weeks before this one, so I didn't remember to shoot them. Oh, and guess what? They make you play a reskin of this level, but now it's nighttime and foggy, so the draw distance is even worse. Yeah, this is where I quit playing the single player. I think they did this because they wanted to follow the movie's trajectory and keep all the set pieces, but they could have at least redesigned them to be more enclosed with, I don't know, trenches or a maze, something. Just do anything other than that. I didn't want to finish this review because I just struggled to keep playing levels like these, and I ended up just deciding to not finish the campaign and move on to the multiplayer. Well, I get it. This multiplayer is hella fun. It actually solves nearly every problem I had with the single player. The multiplayer maps are the same ones from the single player, but they only chose the enclosed interior levels that don't have the draw distance issues. There aren't any objectives to misinterpret, and there's a mini-map that shows you where everyone is with these dots. I don't really know why they didn't use this mini-map in the single player, because it fixes the draw distance issue and some of the other issues like the hostage thing, but I'm glad they incorporated it here. There's a variety of different modes you can play with up to 4 players. There's a timed mode that you can win by getting the most kills before the timer stops, a stocks mode that awards W to the last man standing, or some other goofy modes like the bullshit golden gun modes that has every player looking for a golden gun that one hit kills everyone. So if someone gets this gun, they instantly win pretty much. You also get to choose what kind of weapons are in the match. You can go with automatics or handguns, but if you go with mines, it completely changes the game from chasing down and shooting your opponents to setting up traps and trying to outmaneuver your opponents instead. You can choose throwing knives, which is just a harder guns mode pretty much, or if you really hate yourself, you can choose slappers, which leaves everyone unarmed and you have to use this shitty karate chop thing to win the game. There's also multiple characters you can choose from so that you can tell who you're killing, and I think there's some different hitboxes, but I don't really know, to be honest. There's just a lot of customization you can do with the multiplayer, and Rare really hit it out of the park here. Good job, guys. You did actually create a golden standard. Even with a stellar multiplayer, I don't think this game is really worth playing today. Everything that this game did well is completely outdone by the FPS games that came after it. Goldeneye set the foundation that future FPS games would build upon, and with the rise of online multiplayer, it became hard to justify busting out your dusty N64 for a round of slappers. That's not to say that Goldeneye isn't worth playing at all. I think that anyone interested in FPS games and video game history in general should check it out to see where it all started, and you can't deny the nostalgia factor this game carries either. This is a good game, but there are gooder games out there, and these gooder games don't have any of the flaws that this one does. Oh yeah, and they completely remade this game on the Wii, and you should just play that one instead.
GoldenEye is like your mom. Everyone was doing it in the 90s, but if you do it now, you're just going to be left with a bad taste in your mouth. Thanks for watching, guys. If you liked the video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and just spread this video around like the virus. God knows I could use the exposure. And bye.
I guess he likes Halo.